My D&D campaign is rolling death saves, and we're one crit fail away from it falling apart. But I'm determined to force feed it a health potion so I can finish it properly and give my players the ending that they deserve, instead of a slow, fizzling out like a sad balloon. I'm going to go over what I'm going to do to salvage this campaign, and the takeaways that I've learned that I'm going to bring into the next campaign. Scheduling issues, party size, differing levels of player experience, and an unfocused story. I've learned a lot this campaign. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. I'm going to show you how I plan on using Describe more to lighten my GM workload for the rest of this campaign, and into the next one. Welcome to the table. I'm Kelly, and today I'm not the DM, I'm the MD. Oops. Oh, I can't legally say that? What if I do a coy smile after I say it? Hello? Hello? For a few months now, I've been struggling with the campaign I'm running. It just isn't flowing as easily, and I'm not having as much fun running it anymore. And because this is how my brain works, I've been obsessively dissecting it and picking it apart to find the reason. And because Lauren holds the honorable position of partner of a DM, this is what the last few months has looked like for her. Maybe it's because we're playing online? It's just not quite as engaging as playing in person. It's just because the campaign is too scattered. At first I thought it was because we were playing online instead of in person, then I thought it was because we had too many players, then I thought it was because some people couldn't consistently make it, and then I thought it was because the campaign I made was too all over the place, and then I realized it's all of it. And more. But I have a plan to fix it, and I hope that these will be helpful for you if you're struggling with any of these issues. For each of these, I'll share what I'm going to do to fix it in my current campaign, and what I'm going to do differently in the next campaign to prevent it from happening in the first place. The first thing that I want to go over has dramatically changed the way I think about world building, and that is to create fewer NPCs, but make them representatives. I know, less NPCs is ironic for a guy who just put out an NPC generator. But what is a representative? Let me explain. We're currently playing a pirate campaign, which automatically leads to a lot of NPCs. The party has their own ship, and on that ship they have officers and they have a crew. They also often meet other pirate crews who all have at least 7 officers and 30 crew members. I wanted my player's ship to feel alive and fleshed out, so I built out all their officers as NPCs. They all have names, descriptions, mannerisms, unique voices, and goals. Then there are some captains pre-built from the module I'm using, and I built out some of their officers as well. But when we're playing, I can't keep all these NPCs straight in my head, and then I found that my players weren't even really interacting with any of them. But then I realized it's because they can't remember them either. If I can't remember the characters that I made up and keep them straight in my own head, how can I expect my players to? They probably only heard the character's description one time. And because there are so many NPCs, none of them are significant to the story. So in the end, I think I made the ship actually feel less real because I put so much detail into it. I put more work in and made it worse. So then how can we make a bunch of NPCs seem real but not overwhelm our players and ourselves with details? We need 1 or 2 NPCs that represent the 40 people on the crew. I just need to build out 2 NPCs in detail and have them interact with my players. Whenever the characters need something from the crew or need to talk to someone on the ship, they're gonna go to the people that they know. And if there are only 2 actual fleshed out NPCs, you'll have time to make them significant to the players. But this extends far beyond a ship's crew. I keep this in mind for every aspect of the story now. For example, the villain in the campaign is the Empire. It's a massive faction, but it's also kind of nebulous. My players are fighting the Empire, but it's a faceless villain. I've now created an NPC that will represent the Empire. They'll meet this admiral in battle, he'll be a real nasty piece of work, and it'll give them something to focus on. Are your players going to a city? Just build out 1 member of the town guard, 1 shopkeeper, and 1 member of the ruling party. Did you make up Jimbo the Goblin on the spot and your players fell in love? Great, Jimbo now represents that group of goblins and he can be their goblin contact. For the rest of this campaign, I'm going to make less random NPCs and try to make more recurring NPCs. When the characters go to a new place, I'll introduce 1 NPC to represent each faction. For the next campaign, I'll be much more intentional with the NPCs I introduce. If I start having trouble keeping them straight in my head, then I'll know my players probably are as well. I'll try to build in a few recurring contacts that the players can reach out to as resources. Before we talk about the leading cause of death of TTRPG campaigns worldwide, how to focus a campaign, and creating the type of game my players actually want, I want to show you how I'm going to use Describe in this campaign and the next one to reduce my prep workload. Thank you so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Describe offers description text that you can read out or use as inspiration. I've realized that I prefer to build locations and characters from simple descriptions that inspire me. That way, I'll only build out the things that are important for the story instead of trying to remember a whole bunch of details that'll never come up. Using these descriptions as building blocks also means they're very modular. I can take this city description, add in this tavern description, add in this palace description, and these character descriptions. I've made myself a whole little setting that I can use as inspiration and then fill in the gaps however I want. Then, to bring that place and those characters to life, Describe has Opus, their music and sound effects tool. You can embed your descriptions in a block and then add sound and music right in that block so that everything's in one place when you get to that location. There's also a brand new feature in Opus called Player FX. Players can now play sound effects at the right moment to emphasize their own actions and descriptions. There are over 70 free sounds available, or players can try out curating their own sound effects playlists with the extended free trial. Head to the link down in the description to try this out yourself. You can use the code PowerWordSpill at checkout to get an extended 30-day free trial. Let's talk about campaign focus. Our current campaign feels very scattered for a number of reasons. The characters each have different goals, I put out too many plot hooks, and there isn't a clear villain for them to unite against. That, combined with too many NPCs to remember, gives it the feeling that there's simultaneously too much going on and nothing going on because the characters don't really know what they're supposed to do. Luckily, all of this can be solved with one session. Unfortunately, it's session 0 and it needed to happen before the start of the campaign. In our group, character creation has always happened in private message on Discord because we don't want to waste precious game time creating characters. For one-shots, we make sure that all the characters know each other already to skip over the slow, earning each other's trust phase, because there just isn't enough time for that in a one-shot. But it turns out that that's just as important for a full campaign. Having a shared backstory means that the characters can already be aligned, not only in their goals, but also in the types of backstory they create. We do run a casual session 0 where we talk about how some characters might know each other and the themes of the campaign, but people usually bring fully formed characters to that. For this campaign, I wanted to run a pre-written pirate campaign, and my players were all on board and excited. However, I didn't read enough of the campaign to fully understand what type of campaign it was, and therefore didn't communicate that to my players. The result is that 2 of them made epic fantasy pirate backstories with different but very strong character goals, while the other players made less detailed backstories and didn't really give their characters strong goals. The pre-written campaign is a series of episodic pirate adventures with a big focus on hiring crew and upgrading the ship. It was really fun, but as we started playing, I wanted to tie in and resolve these awesome backstories that my players had created. So I started laying plot hooks and breadcrumbs to tie those in. But the pre-written campaign was already a full campaign and it didn't really have room for more. So after I started adding to it, there was just too many plot hooks going in too many different directions. Because there were so many different threads that all felt important, none of them felt important. Also, the 2 types of campaigns, a base building campaign and an epic fantasy campaign, aren't really compatible. There just isn't enough time in a session to focus on the in-depth ship mechanics and developing a strong narrative epic fantasy plot. Are you starting to see the theme here? Less is more. The third thing that's led to it feeling unfocused is the lack of a clear villain, and then also introduce a clear path to defeating them. Like, there's a critical weakness in the Death Star, we just need the plans to figure out what it is and how to destroy it. Or, here, take this ring and throw it into a volcano that's in the middle of enemy territory. The players still get to be creative and drive the story in how they go about achieving that goal, but if they don't know generally what they need to do, then they just kind of stumble around until I give them some useful information. To fix this for my current campaign, I've already figured out how I'm going to tie the 2 character backstories together. So now I'm going to introduce a clear villain and have the players find some information that clearly defines what they need to do to defeat that villain. As they work towards defeating that villain, the goals from the other characters' backstories will also intersect. For the next campaign, I'll run a more in-depth session 0. First, I'll figure out what kind of world my players want to play in and what kind of world I'd like to run. Then we'll get together and make characters together. That way I can build the campaign around the types of characters they make and the shared backstory they come up with. You know, that should really be in the DM's guide. That would be really helpful. Oh, would you look at that? Page 137. It even has different types of campaigns. Figuring out the type of game my players actually want and would be suitable for their playstyle and experience. This is the first campaign I've run where I've had players with different amounts of experience with D&D. Previously, my group all started playing at the same time, so we've all had the same amount of experience. But for this campaign, we added 2 new players who have much less experience with D&D. They've both picked it up really quickly, and I definitely didn't do them any favors and kind of just threw them into the deep end. This pre-written campaign has a lot of additional mechanics, and it also leveled the players up to level 3 very quickly. For experienced players, that's great, but for new players, I think it's important to spend more time at level 1 and learn the basics of how things work. Session 0 can also be a good time to ask your players how hard they want the game to be and what kind of challenges they enjoy. Do they want to be scraping by with players going down every fight, or do they want more focus on social encounters with some light combat sprinkled in? Do they like puzzles? Do they want to be poring over their notes to find hidden patterns, or do they want easy clues that tell them where to go next? It's okay if they don't know, but at least asking the question might get them thinking, and you can ask again once you start playing and they start experiencing different types of encounters. It's also good to get a sense of how much time your players want to put in outside of the session. Do they want to optimize their character, do level ups, take care of admin stuff and shopping all outside of game time? Or do they have a lot going on in their lives and want to do everything in session? There's no wrong answer as long as everyone's on the same page with the level of commitment for the campaign. Now that would be a great thing to put in the DM's guide. Well, page 15. For the rest of this campaign, I'm going to have some admin time at the beginning of the session where we can go over anything the players want, like doling out magic items, doing spells, shopping for basic things, etc. I don't want any part of the game to feel like work, so if having to think about that stuff out of game time is just another thing weighing on my players, then I don't want that. And for the next campaign, you guessed it, more in-depth session 0. Alright, let's talk about the leading cause of TTRPG campaign death worldwide, scheduling. It turns out that people have other things going on in their lives that isn't D&D. As a guy who played D&D one time and then decided to make it his whole personality, I can't relate, but I do understand. Scheduling goes hand in hand with group size, which I'll talk about next. With this campaign, I have 6 players, which is the most I've ever run for. Because of that, I figured it'd be difficult for us all to show up every week, so I said that we would play as long as half the people could make it. For the players who couldn't make it, their characters would just not be there and we wouldn't worry about continuity. The problem is, there are a couple of people who often can't make it, so when they do come, it's really hard for them to contribute because they've missed so much of the story. They're also much less invested in the story because they haven't really had a hand in crafting it. It also makes it really hard to prepare arcs that may complement certain characters' backstories if I don't know who's going to make it that week. So for the next campaign, we'll only play if everyone is present. And before the campaign, during the session 0, I'll get a sense of everyone's availability and commitment level. If it looks like there's a large group but some people won't always be able to make it, then I'll run an episodic campaign. I feel like that should be in the DM's guide for sure. Page 139. Who knew? Jokes aside, I did pick up my copy of the new DM's guide this week, and while writing this script, I decided to see what it said about each of the problems I've been having. I was pleasantly surprised that a lot of them are addressed in there. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I've never read the DM's guide cover to cover, just looked stuff up. And since this one is 400 pages, I'm probably not going to read this one in its entirety either. But so far I like what I see, and the organization makes it much easier to find stuff, which makes it way more useful for me. Okay, so next campaign I'll run a more in-depth session 0, but what about this campaign? Well, I think I'm gonna up my minimum number of players to 4 out of 6, so that at least most of the group is there. But because I established being able to miss sessions from the start, and we're almost a year into this campaign, I don't think it's fair for me to change that part now. And with 6 people playing online, it's actually kind of better if not everyone shows up, otherwise the pace becomes really slow.
Not quite my tempo.
Which leads me to party size, and also to playing online versus in person. From the start, our group has always had 5 players. For the first couple of years, we exclusively played in person, but when the pandemic happened, we moved to online play. Now, Loren and I have moved farther away from our group, so we mostly play online. Somehow, playing in person with 5 players is much easier than playing online with 5 players. Playing in person is just so much more engaging, so it's easier to stay focused. But with 5 people online, it becomes really easy to zone out or start doing something else because there's so much time between turns. Recently, quite a few people couldn't make it, and I ran a session with just 3 players, and what a difference. Even though we were playing online, I felt some of that magic that I've really only felt playing in person. Everyone was fully focused and engaged because there just wasn't time to zone out, everyone was always involved in the action. Having less players also means you can spend more time on each player's backstory without feeling like you're neglecting the other players. Even if you run one social encounter that focuses on a single character every session, that means each character is only going to get one every month and a half at best with 6 players. For this campaign, there isn't anything we can do about group size, but what I would like to do is try to play in person a couple of times before the end of the campaign, especially so the newer players can experience what that's like. For the next campaign, I'm going to try and play a mix of in-person and online, and I'd love to have a 3-person party, or maybe maximum 4. But I also don't want to exclude anyone, so I think I'll run a second episodic campaign every other week, and people can sign up for each session. It'll be first come, first serve, maximum 4 people. For that episodic campaign, I'd also love to do rotating DMs so that anyone who wants to can run a session. And then maybe also I can play. Before I go over the best thing you can do to prevent DM burnout, I want to touch on micro and macro prep. I find that I constantly need to remind myself to find a balance of doing both. Macro prep is the big story stuff. Who the factions are, who the villain is, what their goals are, and how they intersect with the party goals. Micro prep is each individual session and the encounters that go in it. What would be a fun encounter to play? Does this session have a balance of social and mechanical encounters? Is there going to be 2 long social encounters back to back? Is everyone going to be involved in those, or are some people going to get bored? You can't and you shouldn't try to control every aspect of a session, because sometimes your players will initiate 2 long and slow social encounters back to back, and you won't get to that chase encounter or combat encounter that you planned. But if you at least take that into consideration while prepping, chances are your sessions will have a better pace. For this campaign and for next campaign, I'm going to keep reminding myself to prep both. Every time I sit down to prep, I try to answer the questions, what would be fun and what would further the story? Alright. The number one thing that you can do to reduce DM burnout? Don't put so much pressure on yourself. I am constantly guilty of this, and even more so now that I have this channel. I feel like my campaign needs to be at the level of Dimension 20 or Critical Role, that my story needs to feel realistic and the character motivations need to feel complex and rival that of the best fiction. But I need to remind myself that even if I had the storytelling skills that these world-class DMs do, it's also their full-time job, and some of them even have a team of writers. This is my home game, a place for me and my friends to have fun. We're not running an actual play show, we're not professional D&D players. My friends just want to show up to the table every week and have a good time. They're not looking to play in the next Game of Thrones. So what am I going to do to fix that in this campaign and the next? I'm going to try and chill the fuck out. I'm going to do my best to pass my wisdom save every time that nagging voice comes up in the back of my mind that this villain's motivations aren't realistic enough, or this plot has holes in it, or this moment should have been more emotional. And I hope you can too. Whatever kind of game you're running, you're doing a great job. And if your players are having fun, that's all that matters. If you're thinking about starting a campaign, check out this video here for an easy to use campaign structure that has focus and is based around your own players' backstories. Maybe I should give that a rewatch and listen to my own advice. I appreciate you.